Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Chats, Lover of Books author chat. A little housekeeping, please stay muted during the interview, and you're going to have the opportunity to ask Karen your questions. Check the chat for instructions and feel free to post comments there as well. We're going to try to address those as they come up if they're pertaining to what we're discussing. If not, if you want to ask it live, hold it at the end. You'll be able to raise your hand and ask it then. We're also going to take a group photo, so have that book nearby and we'll take a photo with the book. If you don't have it, no worries. A smile is fantastic. And now we're going to introduce this wonderful debut novelist. You can tell it's been a long weekend. Karen Winn received her MFA from Fairleigh Dickinson University. She also holds a doctoral degree in nursing. Born and raised in New Jersey, Karen now lives in Boston with her husband and 2 children. Our Little World is her first novel. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Why don't you, well, first of all, you had a wonderful blurb from Elin Hilderbrand, which she is huge, and especially this time of year in summer, it's all I see. But I wanted to go ahead and give this quote because I thought it was fantastic. It's a coming-of-age novel complicated by tragic and untimely death, and it's also a novel about 2 sisters you will never forget. Our Little World will transport and transfix you. I mean, that's a phenomenal rave review there. So were you excited to see that?
I mean, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. She's incredible. And yeah, you know, I've looked up to her for years. So it was, and I love The Hotel Nantucket, might be my favorite book of hers yet. So it was incredible to get that blurb.
Well, yeah, I read Hotel Nantucket this summer too, and it was a fantastic book. How do you describe this novel? If you have to give just a short little blurb to grab somebody quickly, how do you describe Our Little World?
So Our Little World, it's set in the 1980s in a small idyllic New Jersey town. And it's about 2 sisters with a relationship equal parts love and envy, and how their relationship fractures when a neighborhood girl goes missing. So it's a coming of age with a looming mystery. What
was your inspiration for this book? I mean, where did the idea come from that got it really going?
So I had a few themes that I wanted to cover in this book. I was interested in sisters and secrets. I was interested in complicated, sibling dynamics, and also the idea that you are sort of marked by your youth and your experiences, and that things also have like cumulative and lingering consequences. So something can happen that in the moment seems okay, or not as serious, but it can have like these lingering consequences. So I was interested in exploring small town dynamics and essentially tragedy in a small town atmosphere, and watching kind of what happens in a small town when something like this happens, and in particular in a family and in siblings and in a neighborhood.
So it was themes that really drew you to wanting to write this book, or was there ever like one thing that sort of triggered?
Yeah, it was themes and it was setting. The town of Hammond is a fictionalized town, but it's a fictionalized version, an anagram of my hometown, Mendham, New Jersey, which, similar to Hammond, is a 5,000 person town, very safe. I personally never knew anyone who went missing. It really was this idyllic bubble. But that doesn't make for good writing. You have to put drama in. And there was an incident in my own childhood at the lake that is the fictional lake in the book, but in real life is called Sunrise Lake. And I used to love to swim there when I was younger, and actually, it was funny because, on a side note, somebody from high school Instagram messaged me today and said, I went swimming at Sunrise Lake today, and sent pictures. No, I don't know if they're going to have the same experience swimming there anymore. But essentially, it's this lake surrounded by these dense woods and kind of eerie in that regard. And but I loved it. It had the sandy beach. I used to love to swim underwater. My mom called me a fish, and we were there one day, and as usual, swimming underwater. And when I came up for air, I saw that everybody was exiting the lake. And I hadn't heard the lifeguard blow the whistle, but I must have not heard it because I was underwater. So I followed everyone out of the lake, and I was trying to find my mom, and I must have been like, 9 or 10 years old. And finally I saw her, and there was a kind of this chaotic scene on the beach, and people were in a frenzy. And I saw this probably very nervous high schooler lifeguard who was literally grabbing little girls and saying, "Is this her? Is this her?" And then I realized that they had emptied the lake looking for me, because my mom couldn't find me because I was underwater. And it's just one of those experiences that are in your childhood that are seared in you, one of those visceral memories. And in writing, you talk about the inciting incident, the point, and I'm sure there's writers on this call, and then obviously many bookstagrammers, but you have the point where you're going along in the story, and then something happens to shift things in a different direction, and because otherwise the story wouldn't exist. So for me, it seemed like a great starting point, inciting incident for a story. Like, what if I or someone else had gone missing that day at the lake? So that was the kernel where it all began.
Now, did you always know you wanted to be a writer, or is that something that you came, because you've been a nurse? So
Yeah.
what was your progress, or what was your journey to this book?
So I have always loved writing, and I've also always loved nursing, and I've actually always pursued both. So even, when I was in elementary school, I was making a book of poetry. In high school, I wrote for our school's magazine and our school's newspaper. In college, I wrote for my school newspaper. I took extra writing classes in college. While working as a nurse living in the town of Hoboken, New Jersey, I wrote for a now defunct website covering local events, and I wrote for my hospital newsletter. So I was always pursuing writing. And, I've been in the same Boston writing group since 2009. So it's always been something that I pursued. At different points in my life, I've had more time and energy to focus on writing. And at other times it's been, more focused on nursing, or the kids. I have 2 kids. So yeah, I think at some point though, I felt like I had gotten in my nursing career as far as I was going to go. And I could actually distinctly, not as far as I could go, but I could just very distinctly see it going in this one direction. And meanwhile, that novel that I hadn't written completely was in my head. And I just thought, what am I waiting for? What am I waiting for? So I set a self-imposed deadline. I asked my mother to come up and help watch my kids. And instead of going, I was a nurse practitioner at the time. And instead of picking up shifts as a nurse practitioner, I actually went to work on my novel. And I met that deadline. And that was very big for me because I was always somebody that, loved writing, took numerous classes, did the low residency MFA. But, if you asked me what I did, I would say I'm a nurse. And then sometimes I would say, but I like to write. And it was like this sort of dirty secret, so it was really empowering to myself to say, I'm going to take the time and finish this novel. And, and I think first time novelists, we're all in that boat. You have no idea, like you're taking all these hours and time to work on this, and you have no idea what's going to happen, right? You don't have an agent, you're taking time from your job or your family or your partner. And it's really kind of, you're doing it because you love writing and you feel compelled to tell the story. So that was like a big moment for me, just to to take myself seriously as a writer.
Well, first of all, I love talking to equally left brain, right brain people. And I think you're probably one of those. And we're so glad that you took that leap of faith, because this book is really a phenomenal first book. I mean, it's excellent, and I really enjoyed it. I loved that you said it in the mid 80s. There are so many references that you could have chosen, right? I mean, the 80s is chock full of cool stuff. How did you decide what you were going to pick? I mean, obviously, big events, the Challenger, you know, Japanese Flight 123, those are big things that happened right then. But cultural references, how did you go about it?
I mean, some were things that I had liked in the 80s. You know, I was a child of the 80s and 90s. So some were, you know, toys or music or things that I remember, even household decor. And then, yeah, you know, it was a lot of looking online and seeing what was popular and thinking about it. And there was a lot of other stuff too that, you know, ended up getting cut, of course, too. So it was kind of picking what, maybe simply what I liked the most.
It's kind of what stuck, huh?
Yeah.
How long did the process take, writing it and then getting it published? And
Yeah, it took a really long time. I mean, as I mentioned, that period of time that I mentioned where took the time to write it, that was just, you know, one finished draft of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was not the draft that I ended up, you know, querying agents with. It was, you know, so it's been a process. And to be honest, it's been many years, but it has not been continuous. You know, I've worked on it and I've done other stuff and I've worked on it. And then, you know, even my agent, who I had met at a writing conference, the Muse in the Marketplace here in Boston, I had done this thing where, you know, you meet with an agent, and I showed her my pages and she said to me, send me this when you're done. And I ended up sending it to her, I think like 17 or 18 months later. So with like headline in the subject line, like, you know, Muse in the Marketplace. So she was hoping, I'm like, what if she doesn't remember me, right? It's been so long. And I also mailed the script to her, manuscript to her. And she said, I received both the email and the mail. You know, thank you. And, you know, give me some time as I, you know, get to it. And then when I did have the call with her, where she was keen to discuss representation, my sister said to me, just don't tell her how long it took you to write the novel, Karen. I think she was going to think that I was like this one-hit wonder because it had taken so long. So to answer your question, it took a long time, but I think it was interrupted by life and you know, my nursing career and many other things.
Well, we're glad that we got that finished product. And now there were some very interesting things that I had not encountered before. One being the Hungarian ancestry. I don't know that it's come up in many novels. Is that something that is peculiar to you or to an experience, and why?
Sure. Yeah. So my late father was a Hungarian immigrant. So, you know, I grew up having an immigrant father. So I knew that experience, and he and his family were, my grandfather had printed anti-communist material. My grandfather, they were refugees, about to be persecuted for their actions. So I know what it's like to grow up in a household where you have a parent who is from another country, and you have this cultural aspects that you're introduced to, as well as this sort of like fear or personal experience with communism that my father had. However, you know, that is where the similarities between my father and Bee and Audrina's father end. You know, just like anything, you start with one thing and then you kind of go along. And I think everyone here has probably read the book, but you know, my father, who unfortunately passed away about 12 years ago from cancer, he was like the light of my life and a wonderful husband and wonderful father, and he was great. So,
Well, I think it's fantastic that you brought that in, that little piece of him along in the novel with you,
Yeah.
because I mean, he gets to share in it. But you ended up with the name Karen, not Borka, or is
Right.
that?
I might have been better off at this point with the name Borka. Let's be honest.
Yeah, Karen has
Nobody
taken a
wants the name
turn.
Karen these days.
Now, in the book, you also mention other books. So, because Bee was a big reader, are those also books that you were familiar with that you wanted to pull in because you had that through your childhood?
One of them is actually a book, Why the Sea is Salt, that my husband introduced to me, that we like to read to our kids. Wanted to give a nod to that because I just think it's a great book. But sure, I mean, I loved Ellen Montgomery growing up. I was more Anna Green Gables girl. But yeah, it was fun also to touch upon some of those references.
Same here. We spoke earlier, the LBs did, with Kaya Harris with What the Fireflies Knew, and that book, Anna Green
I
Gables
read that
was
book.
throughout. Yeah, I
Exactly. Yeah.
love when books are in books. It's just,
Yeah.
it really has a special feeling. Now, the big part of it is the sister relationship. You mentioned you have a sister, so that's something you could draw on, I'm assuming, and I'm sure that relation, it stops somewhere, but tell us about that, why you wanted to bring that in.
I mean, I think that, in a family, sibling relationships are so interesting and probably kind of the most complex relationship that one can have, because you're growing up together in the same environment, but yet you have different outlook on things and you're experiencing things differently, and you may be naturally pitted against one another, especially if you are sister, brother. So yeah, I was just kind of interested in that kind of push and pull that is common in sibling relationships. I will say though, again, my family, it's fiction. I also have a brother who's actually, I think, on the chat. He's so supportive. And my sister is great. My mom's also on the chat. So we are a very close family, and yeah, this is, and my sister was very actually supportive of the book, which was fantastic. Like she was one that she was an early reader, and she told me to send it out. And I remember saying, well, I don't know if it's ready yet. And she said, send it out. It's good. Send it out. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So thanks, family, because without the babysitting and the
Yeah.
support emotionally in the
Right.
background, it might not be here. So we appreciate y'all just as much. Was one sibling easier or harder to write than the other?
I think that it's interesting. Like, I always knew who they both were in my head. Default a first person narrator, of course, you're just seeing Bee's point of view. So, there was at one point someone in my reader feedback writing group that wanted more from Audrina's end. And at that point was when I made the diary entries. And that was a great way to show who she was. And also because I knew that she was not what she appeared to be in terms of Bee's mind too. I knew that Audrina was also had cracks of her own and was insecure and shouldering a lot, and especially obviously with the diabetes diagnosis. And in my mind, she was like always quite vulnerable, actually, even from the start. Probably because I knew what was going to happen to her too. But just to show that, at camp, that was all what it appeared to be. And I enjoyed being able to show that side of her. And then also for Bee as an adult to reconcile that.
Well, as an older sibling, I did not have a sister, but as an older sibling, I really did identify with Bee so much with those feelings, because it's hard to navigate any sort of sibling relationship. But it was interesting that when you pulled in the diary, it sort of flips on its head, and maybe I'm not so sympathetic with Bee anymore, and it shifts to Audrina. And so I think that was great because it shows flaws in both. and not necessarily allowing us to be totally in one corner or the other. So that reader suggestion, I think, was a fantastic one. Did you feel more sympathy towards one or the other, or did you have a favorite?
You know, I don't, it's such a hard question. I felt invested in every single character, I think, you know, and because to me, they were very alive. And I remember being like, I cried when Audrina died. And I also felt this profound sort of sense of sadness, like when I was done with the book too, just to be like leaving these characters, because I had grown attached to them. So I don't think there was one in particular, but there were aspects of, I think, each character in the book, all the main characters that I was drawn to, that I felt empathetic towards all of them.
Now, some of the things that they said to each other were pretty harsh, which, you know, we think back to our own childhood and that comes up. But I think what makes them forgivable is that they are children, and you empathize with them because you know you went through it. But with the father, he said some pretty hard things to both of them, blaming for Audrina's death. Do you believe that that forgiveness was ever really there for him in either direction?
I'm so sorry. I just lost you for 1 second there.
That's okay.
Can you repeat
Yeah, I was
that?
just wondering with the father, if you believe that he gave forgiveness or received forgiveness, because what he said to both Bee and the mother were pretty harsh.
Yeah, maybe actually that's the one character I don't have empathy for. No, I mean, I had empathy for him too, in terms of the fact that obviously he had lost his child. But you know, I think that both the parents were very flawed. You know, the mom too, in a lot of ways. And you know, they didn't do a great job in a lot of ways. So, and you know, in particular, the father, I think that, but you know, I think that not that his eventual, like, because he really internalized, it became very internalized in the aftermath of Audrina's death, and kind of like lived a existence that was a shadow of himself. And I you know, I think that's also life, sort of, right? And I think that he had to live with his own regrets over things that he said and did. And you know, I think one thing that I tried to do with this book was just make it very realistic too, in terms of life and events and people's decisions and what that leads to and what that looks like. And, you know, there's not always necessarily like the happy ending for many of these characters, including the father.
Well, I think that the cover, you know, was pretty good foreshadowing with, you know, showing that this probably may not be the perfect ending if that's what you're looking for.
Right.
Why did you decide, what was your thought process in why you chose the age of the girls? And I know you said you were a child of the 80s and 90s, but is there any particular reason at that specific spot in history?
So I wanted to do the 80s for a number of reasons. And I chose 1985 in particular for a number of reasons. It was just like a really interesting time in our country in terms of stranger danger and these like high profile missing kids cases. And in my research, I had uncovered that it's just thinking about how the local police would have handled Sally's disappearance, that at that point, there was this very newly nascent national database to even report when a kid went missing. But prior to like 1982, that didn't even exist. And the FBI in 1985, the FBI still rarely got involved. Local police were very sluggish to respond. Response efforts were very much guided by the family of the missing child. And so this was all just sort of starting to emerge. So I felt that it was a good time to set it, both from a cultural standpoint in terms of the missing kids and the milk cartons, which had just come out in 1984, about 6 months prior to the start of my novel. And then also from a logistics perspective in terms of how the local police would have handled stuff. I just felt like it was a good point to set it, good year to set it in then. And then in terms of the ages of the kids, I wanted them to be kind of like on the cusp of teenage. So, she's like, it's basically a year and a half, 10 to almost 12. And I think that, or 11 to 12. And I think that I'd like being on the cusp of teenage years, and where you're still innocent, but that innocence is starting to end quickly.
Well, and those middle school years can be really
Right, and
brutal.
they're rough. Yeah,
Extremely rough. My daughter missed it because of COVID. And I was like, that may have been one blessing in there, is that you missed all but like 6 months of your middle school years. So now you did bring up some very serious topics. One was with how Bee dealt with her anxiety. Can you talk about that and why you chose what you did?
Sure. So Bee develops this hair pulling disorder, Trichotillomania. And, I wanted, like, when I was just thinking about how these events would have affected these girls, I just felt like they were just holding so much in. There had to be cracks. And what did that look like? And for Bee, it just seemed like a natural thing that she would do, develop this thing that not only, because shame is a big, and guilt is a big part of Bee's existence. And it just led her into more sort of shame and guilt, because she had to, like, it was another secret that she had to hide. And then it also affected her appearance, which made her even more insecure. So it seemed like as a natural sort of fit in terms of that, and a good tool to show that she was cracking under all of this.
Is this something more common with girls? Because I do know 2 girls who have had this, but I've never heard of boys, but I'm sure it does exist, but I didn't know if that was something statistically there or not.
I'm not sure. I would probably, that's also true. I think that I've heard more sort of just anecdotally female, but I'm not sure, to be honest. I also think, it was interesting in the 80s because it wasn't even formally recognized as like a disorder until 1987. It was just sort of archaic, like they didn't even know how to treat it. And so I just think it was also interesting time period.
So which came first? Did you decide to use that, or did you see in your research, oh, this is something that's discovered in 1987? Like, which came first, the chicken or the egg for you?
So it was the hair pulling disorder first.
And so then you just got that little apple, that little tree.
Yeah, sometimes it works out like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Now let's talk about diabetes, because that was a huge part of this story. Do you have any personal connection to this, or is it just your knowledge from being a nurse?
Yeah, I don't have personal connection to that either. Just experience being a nurse. I've taken care of many patients with diabetes, both type 2 more commonly, but also type 1. And so, I'm very familiar with it. And yeah, it's interesting because I think that I just sort of naturally inflict things on my characters because I'm a nurse. But just being I think I'm just always surrounded by this idea that illness, essentially, that there's health and then underlying it is illness, and that's a part of life. And so it makes its way into my writing. And Audrina was always going to have type 1 diabetes. And as I mentioned earlier, it gave her more complexity that I knew from the beginning when I was writing her. And I knew it was going to lead to her demise as well. So yeah, and then it was also, and then again, to sort of answer your question, chicken or egg, I had to go back and really understand about how this disease would have been handled in the 80s. And it was really fascinating. I mean, we've come a long way with stuff, but I did, and the internet didn't exist really in the 80s. So to get this information, I had combed through, medical journals and nursing journals from that time, from the decade in the 80s, and wanted to make sure that it was, I was accurately depicting this disease and historically accurately depicting it.
So even though you're a nurse, you still had to go back and do quite a bit of research, it sounds like. Was that your biggest research project on this book, or were there other things that took up more of your time and energy?
I would say it was one of the biggest, just because I wanted to make sure, again, that I was getting it. So for instance, in my mind, I know exactly, like, not even in my mind, I have it written down, the regimen that she was on in terms of like the type of insulin and this and that, because also as a nurse, like I just needed to know that, right? So I in my notes somewhere I have that she took, this much NPH and then this would have peaked at this time, and even thinking about the lunch scene and all of that. So I needed to understand that. But all of it took time. And even the DNA aspects at the end, that took time to research. So there was a fair amount of research that I did have to do, and some of it was more fun and lighthearted. And for the pop culture stuff, that was obviously more fun. And I even I would look at home renovation projects online, and I would look at the before pictures, because they'd be like, people would be trying to get rid of like this 1980s kitchen. I'm like, oh, let me see these before pictures, because I want to capture that. And I bought a book on eBay, some like home and better gardens book from the 80s too. And I was like flipping through that and just trying to picture what the family's house would have looked like. So yeah, some of it was lighthearted, and then obviously some of it was very dark. But we also, as a family, watched a lot of 80s movies, and so that was kind of fun too.
Yeah, the Star Wars bit in there brought me back, because we did that as a family too. This is kind of a random question, but when you write, do you write in the quiet with music, at a desk, outside, coffee shop? What's your scene look like?
All of the above.
Okay, whatever works that day, huh?
Yes. I'm not choosy. No, generally speaking, I do like to listen to music and kind of tune things out. I like to have sound, and generally music helps.
80s music, is that?
Yeah, I definitely had a soundtrack. And there's actually on Spotify, there is a playlist called Our Little World. So you guys can look that up. So there are songs that I'd listen to, and a lot of them are 80s songs, but then there are some more recent songs too that I felt captured the essence of Our Little World. Like for instance, Moon Taxi, Hometown Hero, that song. So yeah, so I listened to music. I was not only just writing this book, so I was often on the go and squeezing in words whenever I could. And that meant while waiting in the parking lot for my kids, that meant at my daughter's gymnastics class while she's like tapping on the window trying to get my attention. Things like that. So yeah.
Okay, what was your involvement with these three things: the title, the cover, and the narrator for the audiobook? I would love to hear sort of the process for those and what you think of them.
So I was really fortunate that my editor and the team were very, very much valued my input. And it was very much a collaborative effort for all three of those. So the title, I actually had trouble with the title. So the title, it was not always called Our Little World. When I went on submission when I queried my agent, it was called Secret Walking Sally. because there's a now deleted scene about how these events in Bee's life at the time were kind of spinning around in our head like a pinwheel. And, there's Sally's disappearance, and Audrina, I had her like sleepwalking with the diabetes at one point. And all the secret over the charm bracelet, and it kind of morphed together to secret walking Sally in her head as it kind of went around and around. That scene has since been cut. There's no reason to have it. But my agent did say to me when she got to my book, as she was looking at like her list of to do, she's like, when I saw this title, I thought it reminded me of a country song. So of course I could never look at it the same again, right? So that title went out the window. And then the next title that we had, and that's the one we went on submission with, was called Our Little World War, which I actually really liked. But they felt it, and was a valid point, that it sounded like maybe historical fiction with the World War. So my editor said, what about just Our Little World? And it took me actually a while to come around to that, because I was worried that it was too quiet of a title and that it didn't capture all the complexities of the novel. But then we had just gone through like a revision at one point, a developmental edit. And I just thought it's the perfect title. Like it so fits the book in so many ways. So then I was fully on board. And then in terms of we had gone back and forth about a bunch of different titles, and they were very willing to hear other ideas and thoughts. And then in terms of the cover, again, she was like, what are you thinking? This is what we're thinking. And we talked about stuff, and then they presented us with a few different options. And when I saw the crack, I was one who suggested maybe we could do like a fallen bike or something that just shows that all is not well with this neighborhood. And then they incorporated that and had the crack, and this was the version with some tweaks that I ended up picking. And they were like, great. And then in terms of the audiobook narrator, they floated a few different options, and all wonderful professional narrators. And basically I got to choose. And luckily, Jess Savolinsky was available at the time, so she was able to do an excellent job as the audiobook narrator.
I think that was my first time listening to her as a narrator, and I enjoyed her. I thought she did a great job. And even if you did think this title was quiet, I don't think it comes across anymore. I mean, it really does stand out. And even there's the crack.
It did
here,
such a great job with it. I'm enamored with this.
It's so good.
It's just so good.
All right. While you're doing that though, I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Are you ready? All right. Are you a younger or older sister?
Younger. Well,
80s,
both. I'm a younger
both.
sister, and then I'm an older sister to my brother.
Very good. 80s music or 80s shows?
80s music.
Madonna or Cyndi Lauper?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Oh, I mean, I think I have to go with Madonna.
One of your favorite childhood books?
Well, speaking of, I mean, Anna Green Gables. I married someone named Gilbert, so.
Even better. All right, lake or pool?
Oh, lake.
Small town or big city?
Oh gosh, big city.
Hardback or soft cover?
I'll take either.
Do you like reading or listening?
Reading.
Cabbage Patch Doll or Light Bright?
Oh, another tough question. Both so good. I wasn't much of a doll person, so I'll say Light Bright.
All right. In-person library or an online library?
In person.
All right. If you had to pick, truth or dare?
Oh, dare.
I won't make you take it though.
Why not? Dare.
Exactly. Take the dare. All right, let's go ahead and see. Does anybody have any questions that you want to ask? I know some people were talking about it in the chat room. Let's see
And
if
I just
they're,
wanted to say, like, the Bookstagrammar community has been so incredibly supportive, and I'm like so thankful. And I'm seeing participants here like Whitney and Nanette and Kelly RVA Reader and Dawn and Balanced Bookshelf. And I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone, and Jody. And you guys are just like awesome. So thank you so much.
yeah,
Thank
but yeah, it's such a great community. I tell you, readers
Truly.
are some of the best people.
Truly.
So they've been fantastic. I've enjoyed meeting a lot of them, and some of them are continuing on the chat. So it's fun.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll just, if anybody has any questions, otherwise I'm gonna keep going. All right. We talk about, or you talk about in the book, being stuck within tragedy. And this happens with Bee. She ends up going back to her hometown. She's working with gifts, titled after her dead sister. Talk about that a little bit and what that decision process is like, because I loved your quote of it being a brick house. And is she actually going to be able to move past this brick house tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that she ever will be able to. I think that, and that was going back to like one of the themes that I want to explore. I think that you are very much defined, trapped, I think it was the word I used, by your brick house of memories. I think you are, these experiences make you who you are. I'd like to think that she has found redemption in what she does, and that she has she's at a place in her life where she's grown up, and she's grown up lens, and is able to see the situation and not be so hard on herself, and also still feel connected to her sister, but obviously a profound sense of loss as well. So I think that she, I don't know, I liked her being there. I liked her being connected, and I think at one point I say she's basically living a future created by the absence of her sister. So yeah.
Jody, looks like I'm going to ask you to unmute, and I'm going to spotlight you. And Jody has a question.
Hey, Jody.
Hi, welcome.
This is my favorite book, and I think I feel like I've lived part of Bee's life. I'm within a year of her age, and
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. Thank you so much, Jody.
My father died in January of 1985, and it was a cold day, and I remember the front door, he was at home, the front door being open, and you talk about the smells, like the hamburger, I think.
Yeah.
Those things made such an impact on me. And even if I hadn't experienced something very similar, I'm wondering how you were able to go there, and all the references to that time. I love that they felt real, and nothing was cute, and even as how cute Audrina was, like, it was still very, I just love that kind of understated tone, but the darker parts and the creepy parts of like hiding the bracelet, like, did you experience anything that helped you go there?
Good question. So first of all, like when I write scenes, I do think about all the sensory aspects of it, so, and I also think that for writing a scene like that, where, whether it's the lake scene where Sally goes missing, or the scene where Jimmy is coming to tell them that Audrina has died, at the house, I think that time does sort of slow, right? And you are so much in the moment that you are almost sort of like processing these like very distorted things around you. So I tried to capture that and thinking, and I like the idea of putting these very real and heavy, probably the most heavy that life can be moments, kind of backing them up with things like hamburger meat and just like summer stuff that is so at odds, that makes that moment all the more poignant. So I tried to do that. And then in terms of the bracelet, I didn't do anything like that. I remember, but I just remember as a child being very attached to stuff. And maybe like the closest thing that I could think of is I remember one time I went to my pediatrician's office and had brought some toys with me. And I was playing in the waiting room, and then some like older kid came in and like took one of my toys. And like it wasn't even a toy that I liked, but I was so just like shocked and felt like so just, oh my God, he just took I was just so affronted that he just took my toy. So I think this idea that just being very attached to items and assigning them importance in your childhood, that as an adult you realize they don't have importance, but I think kids do that. Whether it's something that they desire that they don't have, or something that they have that they've assigned meaning to. So I try to, and I also like the idea of there being some sort of physical, like literally a physical piece of like Bee's guilt, sort of like something that Bee was able to associate her guilt with. And then of course I like the other half of it, and then the other half kind of being this trail of, leading to Sally. So I hope that answered your question.
Great question, Jody. I also agree with her. It's a very sensory book. And this was the quote that I think of, and I highlighted it. Back then, we were just regular kids getting through another summer, one day impatiently waiting for the rain to pass, the next sweating under the hot sun, chalk smudged fingers and chlorine tinged swimsuits, kickball and crushes. I mean, right there, you hit every sensor I have for summer. I mean, you have the chalk with I can feel it, I can see it, I can smell the chlorine. I mean, I think that's important for readers because we're all different learners, and that's how we take in information. And you hit it right with Jody, and I think all of us, that's why we're here tonight. So kudos to you.
Thanks, Jody.
All right, anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask? Or I'll keep asking more questions because I could ask all night. She has some great stuff here. All right, one random question here. Oh wait, we have Balanced Bookshelf. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, good afternoon.
Go
I guess good evening. I put my question in the chat. Just kind of how you went about writing the romance and the crushes. I always think that it's interesting to read that from like an adult writer. And so I just kind of wanted to know if you drew from your own experience, because Bee's like crushes is so different from the relationship dynamic between her parents.
Thank you so much, Balanced Bookshelf. So yeah, I really liked writing those scenes between Bee and Max. Like it was fun, and also, and it was such a contrast. And, I certainly drew on those sort of butterfly feelings that I had had when I was young, and in situations, and also like the awkward feelings too that come with being in those situations too. And then, thinking that you may perceive things one way and it could have been perceived another way. So yeah, I definitely drew on my own experiences of my own childhood crushes and insecurities to create those aspects of Bee. I wrote that spin the bottle with the truth and dare, and I don't even know if like I never played spin the bottle with truth or dare. Like I don't even know if that exists. Like I remember at one point I was like, is someone going to call me out on this? But they didn't. So I guess that some people maybe play it that way or go with it. So Yeah. But I just thought it was a fun sort of like mashing of the two as well. So yeah, but it was, I think also some levity, not levity, but some thinking again about contrast. It was like a nice contrast in the book of like sort of young love versus love that has been sort of dictated and hardened by life and choices, personal choices.
Great question, Balanced Bookshelf. And just to follow up with this, because we've had two other coming of age stories, one, Adele Myers, The Tobacco Wife, which some people consider that coming of age. And then as well, we talked about what the Fireflies knew. And somebody asked, and it was interesting, was there any push to try to make this YA? This book did not seem YA to me at all. But when there's a younger narrator, sometimes people think, oh, it automatically belongs in that YA realm. So what are your thoughts on that? And did you have any discussions about that with this book?
Yeah. So no, from the start, it was always considered an adult book. I think in terms of like, it's like coming of age. And I remember I wasn't sure how they were going to market it necessarily, or what category it quite fit into. And I do think it does have crossover appeal to young adult for sure. And I also think the publisher is pushing that as well, in terms of like looking at like secondary education, recommended reading for that as well. So I think there is crossover, but it was more firmly like, it wasn't like a question, I think from the start, it was more like adult that has this crossover appeal into young adult. And I think what probably makes it that is that older narrator aspect of like looking back in time, and while the majority of the book does take place in her younger years, having that sort of wrapping up at the end and it being retrospective really in her telling, is what more firmly puts it in that one camp.
Agreed.
But my 12-year-old niece read it and enjoyed it and recommended it to her friend. And so I do think that there's definitely, and my old math high school teacher, who now teaches at a different school, is trying to get me to go to their high school in the fall, which I would love to. So I definitely think that there is value for readers of different ages.
Awesome. I'm going to ask, we have someone here to ask a question.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm Marion. Hey, Laura.
Hi, Marion.
Hi, Marion.
Love the book. And
Thank
I think
you
one
so
of the things that really hit me was when you talked about how words hurt, because I think we've all said things to people we love that, oops, I never should have said that, and you regret. Did you have, first of all, my first question is, do you have experience like that? And my second was, are you working on another book? So
good questions. So, I didn't have experience with that, but I was just thinking, and it's funny because like I think that I wrote that particular paragraph or scene very quickly in the grand scheme of things, and a lot of people have responded to it. Because I was just trying to think about these dynamics between these sisters and what that felt like and looked like, and how can I describe that? And then that sort of led me down that path. But I do believe in it though. I think, especially nowadays when, people just sort of are saying whatever, and I don't know. Anyway, I think that there is value in meaning what you say. And also standing behind that, but then also thinking about words as having, like, being true to their meaning. So therefore, if they're hurtful words, they're really hurtful, right? And they are kind of lingering. And I think it was just more of a efforts to try to capture that. And then in terms of next books, yes, I'm working on my next book. So my next book is set in present day Boston, and it's about 3 women and who become loosely entangled in a secret society over the course of one fall. So it's fictional. There's this fictional centuries old private member / secret society in Boston called the Knox, and they have this rush season each fall, and these 3 women, 2 of whom are friends and one who has this troubled past, they all become like loosely entwined in this secret society over the course of one fall. And not surprisingly, friendships explode, relationships explode, secrets come to the surface, and it starts with a dead body in the Charles River. So yeah.
Great
And that's
questions,
probably
Mary.
like the
Thank
most
you.
I've talked about my book to anybody. So yeah.
Hey, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right, we have not a question, but a comment here from Kelly. She says, I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I was excited for the diabetes representation in the book. It brought back memories too, because I was diagnosed in 1993, and diabetes care has come a long way since the 80s, early 90s. And I know I was so heartbroken when I found out the timing of that, of the not the patch, the pump,
Mhm.
the pump, that how it came just after. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, first of all, with everyone. I appreciate that.
Kelly.
I really appreciate that you can appreciate also the advances in medicine and therapeutic therapeutics for type 1 diabetes in more recent years. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the pump actually was kind of coming out, like Audrina could have been technically eligible, but her family didn't explore that, because I think also pockets of it was just starting to emerge, right? Which also even makes it more tragic. But I think that in terms of their small town and how the local doctor that they saw, I think that it wasn't on their radar quite yet. Yeah, I think, and that was something that came later, because I was trying to figure out too, with all of that, and then how to weave that in a way that acknowledged the advances in medicine, but stay true to the story too. So that also then I think maybe prompted some of the scholarship fund aspect and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, just to sort of acknowledge your comment that I'm looking at your comment now, it has really come a long way. And I've heard from readers personally who have appreciated, and I love that, like when people are like, you sorry, I'm just dropping things here. You depicted it well and accurately, because that as a nurse makes me feel so good too, because I want to make sure that I am accurate in those portrayals.
Well, I think it's important too, just for the representation part, because you don't read about it, and people have it and they live with it and they suffer through it and they work hard to do what they're supposed to do. And it's nice to be able to see yourself on the page sometimes. So I'm sure that's a huge win for that community. So awesome. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to keep asking if there's any questions. Just go ahead and raise your hand. And Selena asks, if very specific, about if you have a favorite underappreciated novel, something maybe we haven't heard.
Well, I mean, it was still appreciated, but maybe not as much. So Mary Beth Keane, everybody knows her for Ask Again, Yes, but she wrote a novel called Fever, which was about Typhoid Mary, and a historical fiction book about Typhoid Mary, and I loved it. Like, I devoured it. Also, I think because of my nursing background, really enjoyed learning about her portrayal of, from the public health perspective, like the typhoid crisis and how that all unraveled. It's a fascinating book, so well written. So I highly recommend that one.
I don't think you could have recommended a better book because Selena's a nurse. So that was a great one. All right, we're running out of time. So I will ask if you have any other book recommendations that you want to give us, something maybe you're reading now or that's coming up, or any classic, whatever.
Yeah. I always like to promote my fellow Boston debut writers. So actually, speaking of young adult and historical fiction, somebody in my writers group, Betty Yee, wrote a fantastic novel called Gold Mountain, which I highly recommend. And it's about a Chinese woman who essentially assumes her dead brother's identity to come work on the Transcontinental Railroad. And she's trying to earn money needed to free her politically imprisoned father back home. Fantastic book. Also recently read The Secret Life of Meena Dave by Namrata Patel, also another Boston writer who I know and whose writing I admire, and that was a fantastic read and has really is really doing very well, as it should. And I recently read a book called These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant, which I absolutely love, like very atmospheric novel, beautifully written, just loved it. And I'm just starting, because everyone's read this but me, I'm just starting Lessons in Chemistry, which I'm very excited to read. And then I also have a couple other books here on my to be read, including One Italian Summer. I don't know if you guys have read that yet. I haven't read that yet. And I have not yet read this one, so I wanted to read this one as well. When I just recently read The Club by Ellery Lloyd, which I really enjoyed. I'll mention that one as well.
Excellent. I think we all just added to our TBR. So thank you for that. And thank you, Karen, so much for joining us. Like, this was a fantastic night. Thanks you to her family for coming and spending the night with us here on the LBs, and all these wonderful readers out there that are helping promote debut authors. Y'all are doing a fantastic job. She appreciated it. I appreciate it. Please check out our website, follow her on Instagram for her latest news. I'd love everybody to follow the LBs, the Lover of Books, either on Facebook or on Instagram. We are recording this chat and it should be put up in a day or so on the YouTube channel, the LBs Lover of Books. Coming up in a couple of Sundays, we have, I don't know if you can see right there, it's Diane Chamberlain's. She's a New York Times bestseller, and it's called The Last House on the Street, where two women, a generation apart, find themselves bound by tragedy and an unsolved decades-old mystery set in 1965 and 2010 North Carolina, both on a collision course with the truth and a search for justice. You won't want to miss it. Thanks, Mike, for running behind the scenes. This author chat wouldn't be here without the author and without these great readers out here. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate y'all being here. So good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.